On behalf of Lawrence High School, I would like to thank Martha Levitt, Eileen Bernal, and the rest of the board of the White Fund, and Dr. Lane Glenn, president of Northern Essex Community College, for their efforts to enrich our school and community. And on a personal level, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Richard Blanco to our stage. He is truly a national treasure. Clap it up for him. This is the first White Fund Enrichment Lecture of the year, and it's my pleasure to introduce Lane Glenn to kick off the 2013-2014 White Fund Enlightenment Series. Himself a graduate of a community college, Dr. Glenn served 5 years as Vice President of Academic Affairs for Northern Essex before he was named President of the college 2 years ago. He is passionate about finding ways to help students achieve their educational goals. Northern Essex enrolls close to 150 Lawrence High School graduates studying subjects such as nursing, criminal justice, engineering, and liberal arts at its campuses in Lawrence and Haverhill. Please welcome a great friend of the Lawrence Public Schools, Dr. Lane Glenn.
Wow, thank you. That's fantastic. I love it. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Rich. I appreciate that. Just before I introduce today's speaker, I want to thank you, Rich, certainly, and Tim Finn from Lawrence High School here for helping to put this together. I'd also like to recognize Eileen Bernal, who's here in the audience this morning. She's a Lawrence City Councilor and a White Fund trustee, wonderful friend to the college, as well as Susan McNeff from the YWCA of Greater Lawrence, which also provided some support for this event. So how about a hand for Eileen and Susan, please? Just before we got started today, I was speaking with Richard Blanco about the White Fund series, and I said, you know, it'd be wonderful sometime to look at a list of all the people who have spoken as part of this series. I imagine it's on a great long scroll somewhere. This thing's been around for 150 years and has really had some just amazing speakers a part of it. It began more than a century ago thanks to the generosity of Daniel Appleton White, an Essex County judge and a Massachusetts congressman. And in the early years, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Booker T. Washington were speakers. More recently, and some of you have seen some of these speakers, we've welcomed Junot Diaz, we've welcomed U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz, NASA's first Hispanic astronaut, and a whole lot of other folks here to this stage. And today, in just a moment, it's going to be my great pleasure to welcome here the poet Richard Blanco to the White Fund Series lecture stage. Earlier this year, Richard received one of the highest honors that a poet can earn. President Obama invited him to read an original poem at his inauguration in January. That's just fantastic. He wrote one today, especially for the occasion. It's a poem which Hector Tobar of the Los Angeles Times called an intimate and sweeping celebration of our shared identity as a people. He also penned Boston Strong, a poem honoring the victims of the marathon bombing that was presented on May 30th at the TD Bank Garden as part of the benefit concert there and was read again at Fenway Park at a Red Sox game. Now, I think that's sort of the height of cool when you're a poet, when you have your poem read at a Red Sox game, right? Boston Strong particularly. Born in Madrid, Spain, to Cuban exiles, Richard was just weeks old when his family moved first to New York City and then to Miami, Florida, where he was raised and educated. Since childhood, Richard says, he felt caught between two worlds, the imaginary world of his Cuban heritage, as seen and heard only through his parents' nostalgic stories about the homeland, and the other imaginary world of the real America that he envisioned from TV shows and history books, a very different place from the predominantly Cuban community where he actually grew up. In today's presentation, Richard's going to share poems and commentary that explains how he navigated this cultural identity between these two worlds and came to a real understanding of America and of his place as an American. I was interested to learn that Richard actually started his career as a civil engineer. I have a lot of those in my own family, and came to poetry more recently. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, as well as a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from Florida International University. He now lives in Bethel, Maine, from Miami to Maine, and in November, his memoir titled All of Us, One Today will be released. Please welcome to the stage, Richard Blanco.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. And buenos dias. How is everybody? Man, I haven't been in high school in a long time. You guys are pretty awake for this hour. I am a night owl. But anyway, I'll try pep up here. Yeah, as Lane was saying, to give you a little bit of my background, to how I put it a little bit more poetically, is I was made in Cuba, made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States, which means my mom left 7 months pregnant from Cuba with me. We had to go back then in 1968 to Madrid, where I was born. A couple months later. And then 45 days after I was born, we emigrated once more to New York City and eventually Miami, where I grew up. So by the time I was 45 days old, I technically and figuratively belonged already to 3 countries, which was kind of weird. My baby picture, my very first newborn picture was actually my green card photo. So it was kind of a foreshadowing, an ironic foreshadowing of things that would obsess me in my life later on as I was growing up, and my work eventually when I started writing poetry. As Elaine was also explaining, I grew up between 2 imaginary worlds, and I think that's probably the case with many of us here today. One was that world that my parents were talking about, the 1950s or 60s Cuba, that country we left behind, that place that was this paradise where the mangoes tasted better and the pork tasted better and the salt was saltier and the sugar was sweeter and all this. But there was another imaginary world because I grew up in a very isolated, sort of very close-knit Cuban community in Miami, especially back then in the 1970s. And that was the world that I saw on TV, from reruns of TV shows like Brady Bunch. Anybody, do we know Brady Bunch here? Oh my God, what a surprise. Good, that makes my life a lot easier. Brady Bunch, Leave It to Beaver, not so much. But you know what I'm saying, those classic sort of TV shows that sort of portrayed America in this very idealized version. And also the idealized versions in the history books and in those storybooks of the Pilgrims and all those men in white wigs and all this stuff. So I really believed, because everybody around me was Cuban, right, that there was an America that actually existed. So Miami felt like this in-between place, like sort of a cultural purgatory, waiting between that real Cuba that my parents talked about and the real America that's supposedly somewhere just north of Miami. And that basically means I grew up with several questions in my head. Probably like many of us here today is, where am I from? Am I American? Am I Cuban? Am I both? Am I neither? Am I Italian? Who knows, right? The whole idea, that whole obsession of where I'm from and who I am. And although that's a particular story and a particular concern I just told you, I want us all to recognize as well that really it's a universal question. You could have been born in the same town that your great-grandparents were born and still have those same questions. I don't know that I really belong to this town. I feel like I should move to New York City, or I should move to Los Angeles. That sense is an eternal sort of universal human drive, that idea of trying to find where we belong, and not just in the terms of culturally, but just emotionally as well. And I think that's what my poems are also ultimately trying to reach for. I usually like to begin with this poem ever since the inauguration, because it was the very first poem I wrote in my very first graduate creative writing course. And we read some Ginsberg, we read some Frost, we read some Whitman. And guess what my very first assignment was? Write a poem about America. So it's kind of the same assignment I got 20 years later when Obama called and said, write a poem about America. So it's this interesting sort of bookend for my life. It deals with Thanksgiving, and as many of us here might know, Latinos, at least Cubans, we don't quite get Thanksgiving. We've never quite gotten Thanksgiving. In fact, as my mother calls it, San-giving, as in San Pedro or San Ignacio. So it's a whole different kind of feast day. And of course, for Cubans, pork is not the other white meat. It's the only meat. And you should know one other thing. There's a really bad line here about Kennedy that I'm quoting some of my community that I think the White House never picked up, or else I might have never been at that podium. So here we go. Let's start with a fun one here. And the poem's appropriately called America. Although Tia Miriam boasted she discovered at least half a dozen uses for peanut butter, topping for guava shells and syrup, butter substitute for Cuban toast, hair conditioner and relaxer, Mama never knew what to make of the monthly 5-pound jars handed out by the immigration department until my friend Jeff mentioned jelly. There was always pork, though, for every birthday and wedding, whole ones on Christmas and New Year's Eves, even on Thanksgiving Day. Pork, fried, broiled, or crispy skin roasted, as well as cauldrons of black beans, fried plantain chips, and yuca con mojito. These items required a special visit to Antonio's Mercado on the corner of 8th Street, where men in guayaberas stood in Senate blaming Kennedy for everything. Ese hijo de puta. The bile of Cuban coffee and cigar residue filling the creases of their wrinkled lips, clinging to one another's lies of lost wealth, ashamed and empty as hollow trees. By 7, I had grown suspicious. We were still here. Overheard conversations about returning had grown wistful and less frequent. I spoke English. My parents didn't. We didn't live in a 2-story house with a maid or a wood panel station wagon, nor vacation camping in Colorado. None of the girls in my family had hair of gold. None of my brothers or cousins were named Greg, Peter, or Marcia. We were not the Brady Bunch. None of the black and white characters on Donna Reed or the Dick Van Dyke Show were named Guadalupe, Lázaro, or Mercedes. Patty Duke's family wasn't like us either. They didn't have pork on Thanksgiving. They ate turkey with cranberry sauce. They didn't have yuca. They had yams, like the diddles of pilgrims I colored in class. A week before Thanksgiving, I explained to my abuelita about the Indians and the Mayflower, how Lincoln set the slaves free. I explained to my parents about the Purple Mountain's majesty, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, the cherry tree, the Tea Party, the amber waves of grain, the masses yearning to be free, liberty and justice for all, until finally they agreed this Thanksgiving we would have turkey, as well as pork. Abuelita prepared the poor fowl as if committing an act of treason, faking her enthusiasm for my sake. Mama set a frozen pumpkin pie in the oven and prepared candied yams, following instructions I had to translate from the marshmallow bag. The table was arrayed with gladiolas. The plattered turkey loomed on the center on silver plastic from Woolworth's. Everyone sat in green velvet chairs we had upholstered with clear vinyl, except Tio Carlos and Toti, seated in the folding chairs from the Salvation Army. I uttered a bilingual blessing, and the turkey was passed around like a game of Russian roulette. Dry, Teoberto complained, and proceeded to drown the lean slices with pork fat drippings and cranberry jelly, esa mierda roja, as he called it. Faces fell when Mama presented her ochre pie. Pumpkin was a home remedy for ulcers, not a dessert. Tia Maria made 3 rounds of Cuban coffee, then Abuelo and Pepe cleared the living room furniture, put on a Celia Cruz LP, and the entire family began to merengue over the linoleum of our apartment, sweating rum and coffee. Until they remembered it was 1970 and 46 degrees in America. After repositioning the furniture, an appropriate darkness filled the room. My Tio Alberto was the last one to leave. Thank you. I think it's kind of a, and I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but it's kind of a misconception that I think many of us have that as a kid, as a Latino kid, or in my case, as a little Cuban kid, that you grow up just loving being Cuban, and you love eating pork, and you love your Cubanness, and you like walk around in ruffle shirts or whatnot. But the idea really is, at least my experience was that in the early ages, I rejected my culture at the beginning because, well, simply it was because it was my parents' thing, right? And anything your parents liked, or any music they listened to, anything they said or spoke, or their breathing even bothered you, right? So anything that your parents stood for, immediately you rejected, right? And it was really a process of falling in love with my culture as I came of age. But in some ways, again, straddling those two imaginary worlds, there was always this America that was this alluring place. And this poem is another sort of funny look at that little Ricky sort of wanting to be this great little American kid. And the poem comes from a memory of the Miss America pageant. And this was a really big deal at our house, which is still confusing to me, but somehow it was a really big deal at the Blanco household, not for the reasons you might imagine. We're certainly not the Smiths or the Johnsons sitting around the TV set. So this is a memory, again, one of those childhood memories. It's called Betting on America. My grandmother was the bookie. Yep, set up at the kitchen table that night, her hair in curlers, pencil and pad, jotting down $2 bets, paying 5-1 on which Miss would take the crown that year. Abuelo put his money on Miss Wyoming. She's got great teeth, he pronounced, as if complimenting a horse, not her smile filling the camera before she whisked away like a cloud in her creamy chiffon dress. I dug up enough change from the sofa and car seats to bet on Miss Wisconsin, thinking I was as American as she because I was just as blonde as she was. And I knew that's where all the cheese came from. And that wasn't all. All the chocolate was from Miss Pennsylvania. The capital of Miss Montana was Helena. Mount Rushmore was in Miss South Dakota. And I knew how to say Miss Connecticut. Unlike my tia Gloria, who just pointed at the TV, esa, that one, claiming she had her same figure before leaving Cuba. It's true, es verdad. I have pictures, she declared, before cramming another bocadito sandwich into her mouth. Papa refused to bet on any of the misses because Americanas all have skinny butts, he complained. There's nothing like a big culo cubano. And everyone agreed. Es verdad. Es verdad. Except for me and my little cousin Julito, who apparently was the breast man at age 5, reaching for Miss Alabama's bosom on the screen, the leggy mulata sashaying in pumps and swimsuit, seducing Tio Pedro into picking her as the sure winner. She's the one. She looks Cubana, he swore. And she did. But she cost him $5. Cojones, he exploded as confetti rained down. Bert Parks leading Miss Ohio, the new Miss America, by the hand to the runway. Gloves up to her elbows, velvet down to her feet. Crying diamonds into her bouquet, the queen of our country, our land of the free, amid the purple mountains of her majesty, floating across the stage and our living room, though no one bet on her, and none of us, not even me, could answer Mama when she asked, Chico, ¿dónde está Ohio? Thanks. So the poems thus far have been obviously from a child's point of view. And when you first start writing, and like I said, writing was a way to coming back and exploring what that childhood meant. But of course, those questions of where I'm from, where I belong, continued very well into adulthood. And one of those questions naturally leads to asking, where are our parents from, or where are my parents from? And for me, that question is particularly important in the context of my mother. My mother left Cuba, left every single relative she had in Cuba, every aunt, every uncle, every brother, every sister. And so my brother and I have always admired her courage and also empathized with her sense of loss. And this poem is a kind of a quiet poem, but it takes place in that one moment when I kind of realized that my mother was a human being, in the sense that I realized that she too had suffered, that she too was trying to make the most of life, that she had questions, that she had made mistakes. And it was just this moment that came very quietly for me. And it was while I was watching her in a grocery store. It's called Mother Picking Produce. She scratches the oranges, then smells the peel. Presses an avocado just enough to judge its ripeness. Polishes the Macintoshes, searching for bruises. She selects with hands that have thickened, fingers that have swollen with history around the white gold of a wedding ring she now wears as a widow. Unlike the archived photos of young, slender digits captive around black and white orange blossoms, her spotted hands now reach into the colors. I see all the folklore of her childhood, the fields, the fruit she once picked from the very tree, the wiry roots she pulled out of the very ground, and now, among the collapsed boxes of yucca, through crumbling pyramids of golden mangoes, she moves with the same instinct and skill. This is how she survives death and her son, on those humble duties that will never change, on those habits of a life that keep alive. She holds up red grapes to ask me what I think, and what I think is this, a new poem about her. The grapes look like dusty rubies in her hands. But what I say is this: they look sweet, Mama. Very, very sweet. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Man, you guys are awake. One of the questions I get asked a lot is like, you're an engineer and a poet? And they look at me like I'm a one-eyed monster. And that's kind of I'll admit that's kind of unique, but it's also not something to be really freakish about. I think if we really understand that knowledge is knowledge, that everything you learn at some point is important. I think I'm a better engineer because I'm a poet. I think I'm a better poet because I'm an engineer, for reasons we might come up in the question and answer. But in any case, that sort of element also takes part of the immigrant story for me. Growing up in my family, the conversation around the dinner table was certainly not about Picasso or Robert Frost. We were a working class immigrant family, lower middle class at best. And so the idea of a career in the arts or whatnot just really wasn't inside the realm of possibility. So hence, luckily enough, I was good at most. I was A/B student in most subjects, and my father encouraged me to study doctor, lawyer, engineer, and I chose the lesser of three evils, I guess. Anyway, this poem is a different portrait. It's a portrait about my dad and my relationship with my father. And a little bit about that, sort of why I studied engineering, is in this poem, and why that means a lot to me. just so you understand the geography of this poem, there's a bridge in Miami as you go away from as you cross the toll road, and it's the highest point in Miami outside of a building. Miami's so flat. And to the left, you have what we call the civic centers, which all the hospitals are. And on the right, you have this amazing vista of downtown. So as you're climbing up the bridge, you have these two sort of sets of landscapes. This poem is called Papa's Bridge. Morning. No, that's the beginning. That's a good one. I should mention that I was designing bridges when I wrote this poem, and I think that's also a connection. Papa's Bridge. Morning, driving west again, away from the sun rising in the slit of the rearview mirror, as I climb on slabs of concrete and steel bent into a bridge, arcing with all its parabolic Y squared splendor. I rise to meet the shimmering faces of buildings above treetops meshed into a calico of greens, forgetting the river below runs, insists on running and scouring the earth, moving it grain by grain. And if only for a few inclined seconds every morning, I am 12 years old again, with my father standing on the 10th floor window of his hospital room, gazing at this same bridge like a mammoth bone aching with the gravity of its own dense weight. The glass dosed by a tepid light reviving the city as I watched and read his sleeping, wondering if he could even dream in such dreamless white. Was he flying? Was he falling? Was he flying? Was he falling? Who was he? Who was I underneath his eyelids, flitting like the birds across rooftops, and the early morning stars wasting away? The rush hour cars pushing through the avenues like the tiny blood cells through his vein. The IV spiraling down a string of clear licorice, feeding his forearm, bruised pearl and lavender, colors of the morning haze, and the pills on his tongue. The stitches healed while the room kept sterile with the usual silence between us. For 3 days, I served him water or juice in wilting paper cups, flipped through muted soap operas and game shows, filled out the menu cards stamped bland diet. For 3 nights, I wedged flat, strange pillows around his bed, his body, shaped like a fallen S and mortared in place by layers of stiff percale. When he was ordered to walk, I took his hand. Together we stepped to the window and he spoke. Mijo, you'll know how to build bridges like that someday. Today, I cross the city, this bridge again, still spanning the silent distance between us with the memory of a father and son holding hands and secretly in love. Thank you. Another way that question of where I'm from or where I belong continues to obsess me is I keep on getting waves of my cousins from Cuba coming to live in Miami. So over the past 10 years, all the cousins of my generation have ended up living in Miami. And it's interesting to watch their lives because even though we're the same family, we have two very different experiences. I grew up here, and I think I'm Cuban, and they grew up in Cuba, and obviously they're Cuban. But it's interesting to watch their lives vicariously because it reminds me of as I grew up trying to negotiate my own cultural identity, my way in America. And one of my favorite cousins is Roxanne, or Roxana, and she's a real pistol, and she's just a great character. And for her birthday, I took her to New York City, which was like her dream. And we're in New York City with my mother and her, and my mother's like, let's take her to the Statue of Liberty. And I'm like, oh, that's so tacky, Mom. You know, that's like so cliche. Come on, immigrant statue. That's so like 1800s. Of course, my mother insisted, and my mother gets her way. And so I ended up having this incredibly moving experience at the Statue of Liberty with my cousin, who had maybe been here 3 months now in the United States. And this is the poem that ensued. It's called Taking My Cousin's Photo at the Statue of Liberty. May she never miss the sun or the rain in the valley trickling from royal palms, or the plush red earth, or the flutter of sugarcane fields and poncianas, or the endless hem of turquoise sea around her island. May she never remember the sea or her life again in Cuba, selling glossy postcards of the revolution and El Che to sweaty Germans. May she never forget the broken toilet and peeling stucco of her government-partitioned mansion, dissolving like a sandcastle back into the Bay of Cienfuegos. May she never have to count the dollars we'd send for her wedding dress or save egg rations for a cake. May she be as American as I wanted to be once, in love with its rosy-cheeked men in breeches and white wigs, with the calligraphy of our liberty and justice for all, our we the people. May she memorize all 50 states, our rivers and mountains, sing God bless America like she means it, like she's never lived anywhere else but here. May she admire our wars and our men on the moon, believe our infomercials, buy designer perfumes and underwear, drink Starbucks, drive a Humvee, and have a dream. May she never doubt America. May this be her country more than it is mine. When she lifts her Diet Coke like a torch into the June sky and clutches her faux Chanel purse to her chest, may she look into New York Harbor for the rest of her life and hold still when I say, smile. So eventually, of course, I did go to Cuba, and I say I returned to Cuba because I felt I had been there through my parents' stories, but really I had never been there. And one of the things that Cubans are known for in Miami is they're known as being, how do you say in Spanish? Hablan mucha mierda, ¿no? They're known for being very boastful and arrogant in a way. They're known for being a little pretentious. And part of that I kind of always bugged me because in part of it it's true, and I never understood that behavior about my people, so to speak. But as I investigated it a little bit more, I realized that it was a way of self-preservation, a way of keeping the culture sort of together by glorifying it, by keeping it alive, by over sort of complimenting themselves, because in their mind the idea was that we were going to go back to Cuba. So it was all this idea, we're going to take it exactly like how we brought it here. We didn't want to assimilate as much. So it was this idea, if we talk about ourselves enough, we'll keep it alive. Anyway, I was thinking about that, and I was reading the story of Genesis in the Bible, of the story of creation. And this title came to me, which is called Havanasis. And it's the story of creation if a Cuban would have written it. And the audacity that, of course, like Cubans invented everything. And, you read this to a Cuban crowd and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. Just the sort of the funny stance of taking a look at one's own cultural stereotype. So this is sort of the inspiration of that poem. So it's called Havanasis, which is a play, obviously, on Genesis. In the beginning, before God created Cuba, the earth was chaos, empty of form and without music. The Spirit of God stirred over the dark tropical waters, and God said, "Let there be music." And a soft conga began a 1-2 beat in the background of the chaos. Then God called up Yamaya and said, "Let the waters under heaven amass together, and let dry land appear." It was done. God called the fertile red earth Cuba, and the amassed waters the Caribbean. And God saw this was good, tapping his foot to the conga beat. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout papaya and cocoa and white cocoa flesh, malanga roots and mangoes in all shades of gold and amber. Let there be tobacco and cafe and sugar for the cafe. Let there be rum. Let there be waving plantains and guayabas and everything tropical-like." God saw this was good. Then he fashioned palm trees, his pièces de résistance. Then God said, "Let there be a moon and stars to light the nights over Club Tropicana, and a sun for 365 days of the year." God saw this was good. He called the night nightlife. The day he called paradise. Then God said, "Let there be fish and fowl of every kind." And there was spicy shrimp enchilado, chicken fricassee, codfish bacalao, and fritters. But he wanted something more exciting and said, "Enough. Let there be pork." And there was pork, deep fried, whole roasted, pork rinds and sausage. He fashioned ghosts, used their skins for bongos and batus. He made claves and maracas and every kind of percussion instrument known to man. Then, out of a red lump of clay, he made a taino and set him in a city he called Havana. Then he said, "It is not good that taino be alone. Let me make him helpmates." And so God created La Mulata to dance huahuancó and song with taino, the Guajiro to cultivate his land and his folklore, Cachita, the sorceress, to strike the rhythm of his music, and a poet to work the verses of their paradise. God gave them dominion over all the creatures and musical instruments and said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Eat pork, drink rum, make music, and dance." On the seventh day, God rested from the labors of his creation. He smiled upon the celebration and listened to their music. Thank you. One of the things, as I said, this whole question of where I'm from or where you belong still is something that sort of obsesses me. At some point in my life, I had made up my mind that the only place that I belong was sort of South Florida, in the way that it's the only place that understood me. It was the only place that was in between those two imaginary worlds. And I went back sort of trying to recapture some of that to a place that we used to vacation in Marco Island on the west coast of Florida. And just trying to take sort of that trip down memory lane, trying to recapture some of what I thought was still there. And of course, everything had changed. It just was a completely different place. And I ended up writing this poem. It's called "Looking for the Gulf Motel." Marco Island, Florida. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with mermaid lampposts and ship's wheel in the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us as they roll a luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 2 dozen loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the marble lobby. All because we can't afford to eat out, mijo. Not even on vacation. Only 2 hours from our home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the wider sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be for the first time watching the sun set instead of rise over the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Gulf Motel, watching us dive into the pool, two boys he'll never see grow into men who will be proud of him. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing parcheesi. My father should still be alive, slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Gulf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear, 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest, like the moon resting on the sea. And the stars, oh, the stars should still be turning around them. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom, sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I can hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking for the Gulf Motel, for everything that should still be but isn't. I want to blame the condos, their shadows for ruining the beach and my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with their tacky McMansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Gulf Motel exactly as it was and pretend for just a moment that nothing I've lost is lost. So I just wanted to share a little bit, and I'm sure there'll be questions, a lot more questions about the inauguration and my experience with that. But I will say this, that the poem itself was very inspired on that very close-knit Cuban community that I grew up in the sense that, I remember even as a little kid, we were always helping each other. They were always watching out for each other. There was this sense of community, of taking care of each other. And that little kernel of my youth, of my childhood, sort of is this ideal that I always sort of felt a community should be about. So, in the short of it, is that at the end of the day, I found home on January 21st. And I realized that home was here all along, that America, that my story was as American as anybody else's. I realized that home was in my backyard, so to speak. It was an experience that I hadn't expected. I just wanted to write my poem, get up there, do my best, and go back home. The emotional experience was even more so than the creative experience of writing the poem. So I'm going to give you a little bit about this, and I'll just read the inaugural poem, and then we'll go into questions. I'm sitting on the platform waiting to be called up. This is part of a little memoir that I wrote that'll be out in November. So this is prose. In that moment, I feel America standing as one, putting differences aside and taking a deep collective breath. We paid tribute to something far bigger and more important than any one of us. And yet, I truly feel like one of us, one of we, the people, in the echoes of Obama's and others' speeches. I embrace America in a way I never had or thought I could, feeling for the first time that I belong, truly belong, to one country. Not an imaginary ideal from TV or a nostalgic island floating in the sea of my parents' memories, but a real, tangible place that is mine, was mine, all along. I turn to my mother and whisper, "Mama, I think we're finally Americanos." She gives me a tender look as if saying, I know. Indeed, I realize it was always one story I was born into, one story for me to discover and claim, one story to make my own. In that instant, I understand one today as a gift to America. Inspired by that realization, I find the courage to open up my binder to the poem and add, "for us today," at the end of the second stanza, as well as tinker with a few other phrases. Senator Schumer introduces me and calls me up to the podium. My mother squeezes my shoulder. I stand more confident than I imagined I would or could be, transfixed by the moment that is no longer about me or my poem or my glory, but about our America. Still, I'm surprised when the president and vice president stand up to greet me and shake my hand on my way to the podium. They both whisper something in my ear that I can't make out. But their gracious gestures speak silently to my heart, as if saying, "Richard, here is your country. This is your story."